Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Now on to our big focus on climate change and how it is wreaking havoc across the globe. Spain faces an unusual situation. The European country is running out of water. After a long and painful drought, the country has been hit by an unusually early heat wave, evaporating even more of the blue gold it still has left in its reservoirs. And here's what is truly astonishing and worrying. According to the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, 75% of Spain's land is battling climatic conditions that could lead to desertification, making it the European nation that is most threatened by this crisis. While farmers fear for their survival, environmentalists say it is time for Europe's back garden to rethink how it uses and manages its increasingly scarce water supply. Now, the month of April this year was the driest month on record, and several Spanish cities registered their highest April temperatures ever. In Cordoba, the mercury rose to 38.7 degrees Celsius at one point, and in the province of Sevilla in Andalusia, it rose to 37.8 degrees Celsius. Coming on the heels of a long-term drought and an unusually warm and dry winter, the latest heat wave has sparked a real fear of shortages. Jorge Olcina, head of the climatology laboratory at the University of Alicante, says the situation is particularly alarming in the regions of Catalonia and Andalusia, where the water reservoirs are at less than 25% of their capacity. Both these regions imposed water restrictions at the end of February, meaning inhabitants were no longer allowed to water their gardens or fill their swimming pools. Farmers were asked to reduce irrigation. Thousands of inhabitants in the Andalusian village of Jaén even went so far as to organize a procession to beg for rain on the 1st of May, bringing out their Christ statue to reinforce their prayers. It was the first time the statue had been brought out of the church basement since 1949. So desperate was the situation. Now, ongoing droughts and an over-exploitation of land for both agriculture and industry have stoked fears in Spain of the creeping spread of sterile soil, which could devastate the country that is known as Europe's kitchen garden. Reacting to the UN warning that 75% of Spain's land is battling climatic conditions that could result in desertification, Spain's ecology minister Teresa Ribera warned, "This puts us in a complicated position in which the combination of extreme temperatures, droughts and other factors aggravate the risk of erosion and the loss of soil quality." According to the Spanish National Research Council, soil degradation has tripled over the last 10 years, creating a problem which is irreversible on a human scale. And that means soils which are unable to retain water or organic matter that cannot support crops or nourish livestock. And that is a matter of huge concern in a country where agriculture accounts for annual exports of close to $66 billion. Soil erosion is now the main problem for most farmers in Spain, and the situation is serious and could have a significant economic cost. Remember, Spain is known, as we said, as Europe's back garden because it exports a large part of its agricultural production. And Spanish farmers are, unsurprisingly, amongst the first to suffer the consequences of a water shortage or a drought. According to the farming unions, 60% of Spain's non-irrigated cereal crops have asphyxiated due to a lack of rain. They say these are cereals planted in the fall and harvested in the spring like wheat and barley. But because of the lack of water, their development was interrupted before they could reach maturity, and so it will not be possible to harvest them. The cultivation of olive, pistachio and almond trees is also likely to decline because even if these plants are used to dry climates, they are suffering from the hotter than normal temperatures. Delaying planting certain crops offers farmers one option for combating the drought, but it comes with inherent risks. As for fruits and vegetables, for those grown on smaller farms that do not irrigate, farmers try to postpone their sowing periods for as long as possible, waiting for better conditions. But the more the time passes, the more they risk missing the season altogether. The huge irrigated crop fields in southern Spain might not be as hard hit, but with the lack of water and the restrictions that have been put in place, the farmers running them will have to lower their returns. Essentially, only crops that grow close to the coastline and are watered with water from desalination plants are expected to make it through this dry spell. The water crisis has prompted the Spanish government to announce a series of measures to help farmers, including a 25% income tax reduction for some 800,000 of them. Environmentalists say it is not only the hotter and drier climate that is to blame for Spain's water crisis. Spanish farming practices are part of the problem too. Julio Barria, responsible for water issues at Greenpeace, Spain, says this drought shows us the limits of the Spanish agricultural model, which is based on the false impression that we have an abundance of water. Today, the Spanish farming sector accounts for as much as 80% of the country's freshwater consumption. Since the 1950s, Spain has installed hundreds of dams and water diversion systems to respond to its recurring water shortages. In all, the country now has around 1,200 artificial dams and reservoirs, more than any other European country. Most of them can be found in the southern half of Spain, supplying mainly intensive agricultural sites, but also smaller farms and tourism activities. Barria says this infrastructure has led us to draw again and again, without any moderation, from our reserves to support an agricultural model that is primarily based on irrigation that has earned us the name Europe's back garden. But at what cost? We have placed our water tables in a state of hydric stress. Today, also taking into account the increasingly visible consequences of global warming, this model is no longer sustainable, he says. As we mentioned, the United Nations has already sounded the alarm on Spain's growing water scarcity, estimating that almost 75% of the country is already in the process of desertification. Desertification also increases the risk of wildfire, as dried vegetation is ideal combustible material. Last year, Spain suffered the largest number of wildfires in Europe, recording more than 500, with over 300,000 hectares going up in flames, according to the European Forest Fire Information System. This year, some 40,000 hectares have already been eaten up by flames, fueled by the higher temperatures, the drier soils and the hotter winds. Spain's State Meteorological Agency has already issued a warning of extreme risk of fire for a large part of the country. Seeing the crisis Spain is currently facing, most Spanish experts have come to the same conclusion. They say, and I quote, "We urgently need to adapt to this new, more arid climate and totally rethink our water management system. Building more water reservoirs no longer makes sense. We have no more water to put in the reserves. Instead, we have to develop new ways to use water, such as by reusing wastewater. But above all, we need to use water more thoughtfully." Greenpeace's Barria says, let's reduce the irrigated areas. We have to stop feeding into the illusion and using water that does not actually exist. Climate change continuing to wreak havoc across the globe. Time for us to slip into another short break, but on the other side, we have a story for you that you don't want to miss.
इंजीनियरिंग कर रहे हैं, जो कि सभी लोग कर रहे हैं।
Coaching is now starting from grade 3, 4, 5, 6.
होता जाने वाली बीच राह में